I was the black janitor. Nobody looked at twice the guy. Pushing a mop past glass walls while million-dollar deals were being made. 3 years later, my face was on the front page of national newspapers for bringing down a $200 million fraud scheme run by the woman who used to humiliate me in front of a room full of executives. If it were you, what would you have done? Kept your head down or lit a match and watched the whole rotten system burn? My name is David Johnson, and this is the story of how a mop, a badge, and a $10 flash drive changed my life forever and ended the career of a millionaire CEO who thought people like me were invisible. I'm not a superhero. I'm not some movie character. I'm just a guy who got tired of being talked down to while the real criminals sat in leather chairs and congratulated each other. You know what I mean? Let me take you back to the night everything flipped. It was a Tuesday close to midnight. One of those nights when Manhattan looks almost too perfect from the outside. All those glass towers, glowing like it's always daytime up there. Inside Sterling Holdings, though, the hallways were quiet. Most of the suits had gone home hours ago. Traffic noise was just a distant hum, and the only sounds on the 45th floor were the soft squeak of my cartwheels and the faint buzz of the lights. I swiped my badge and stepped onto the executive floor. The air colder and cleaner than anywhere else in the building. Like even the oxygen had a dress code. Victoria Sterling's office sat at the end of the corridor. Big glass doors, her name etched in metal, a view that made the city look like her personal kingdom. I'd walked past it 1,000 times, with a trash bag in one hand and a broom in the other. That night, I walked in like I owned the place. Her office smelled like expensive perfume, fresh paper and old power, Italian leather chairs, a desk that probably cost more than my entire yearly paycheck art on the walls I never understood, but learned to dust carefully. I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit, but my hands were steady. I knew exactly what I was there to do. I sat in her chair. That alone was enough to get me fired if anyone saw me. The leather creaked under my weight, and for half a second I thought, man, this chair is more comfortable than my bed. Then I woke her computer, watched the login page pop up, and my brain shifted into gear. I'd seen her type that password hundreds of times. Just some cleaning guy wiping fingerprints off the glass table while she logged in, never bothering to shield the keyboard. Rich people always assume nobody around them is watching closely. I knew the rhythm of her fingers when she paused, which letters she hit harder. It took me a few tries over the months to piece it together. But by that Tuesday, I had it. The screen unlocked. I plugged in my flash drive and pulled up a file I'd been building in secret, a spreadsheet that would have given any federal investigator chills. Transfers from public contracts into shell companies, then bouncing into offshore accounts. Bids that were way too high approved too quickly, with the same few names popping up again and again. Internal memos that made the fraud sound like restructuring and strategic optimization. I wasn't stealing money. I wasn't changing anything. I was just collecting the truth, organizing it into rows and columns, so that when the time came, nobody could pretend they didn't understand. The numbers were the numbers. Numbers don't care about your feelings. I was saving one last set of notes, breathing just a little easier, when I heard something that froze the blood in my veins. Heels, fast, sharp, once familiar heels, echoing down the empty hallway. The door flew open. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice hit me like a punch. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the doorway like a storm in a silk blouse. Hair perfect makeup. Flawless, even at 11:30 p.m. Hermes bag sliding off her arm and dropping onto the floor like she just forgot. It cost more than my rent. Her eyes went straight to the screen. then to me, then back to the screen. For a long second, nobody moved. It was just me in a janitor's uniform, sitting in the big leather chair, fingers still hovering over her keyboard. The black cleaner in the boss's seat. If you had walked in right then, who would you have believed? She snapped first. "You're fired!" she shouted, storming toward me. "Get out of that chair right now! I'm calling security! I'm having you arrested! How dare you touch my computer! Are you insane?" Most people in my position would have jumped up, started apologizing, begged, tried to explain. I didn't move. Instead, I did something that threw her off completely. I took a breath, turned the monitor so it faced her, and stepped aside. On the screen, there wasn't a game or my email or some stupid movie. There was a spreadsheet full of account numbers, company names, transfers between departments that were never supposed to see the light of day, offshore entities, overbilled contracts, diverted funds. The kind of document that could end careers. Interesting how numbers don't lie. "Huh?" I said quietly, keeping my eyes on her face instead of the screen. Especially when you know where to look. Her anger melted into something else, something colder. I watched confusion, then recognition, then fear fight for space in her eyes. She knew exactly what she was looking at. She just couldn't accept that I was the one showing it to her. How is this even possible?" she stammered, the volume of her voice dropping for the first time since I'd known her. "Those files are on a secure server. You don't even have access. You're just a janitor," I finished for her, standing up slowly and smoothing my uniform like I was clocking out, not committing career suicide. "The night cleaner who can't learn the simplest tasks, remember? That's what you called me in front of the board 3 months ago." She flinched, just a little, but I saw it. Pattern interrupt. She suddenly realized I hadn't forgotten that day. People like her never think you remember their worst moments. They think you just absorb the shame and move on. But I remembered every word. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the little silver flash drive, and let it swing between my fingers. 3 years, I said. 3 years of watching, listening, collecting. 3 years of people thinking I'm invisible. 3 years of documents, recordings, email copies. All of it tied to this company. All of it tied to you. She stared at the drive like it was a loaded gun. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "You don't have the guts to take that anywhere." "To the FBI, I asked. To the IRS. To the SEC. Or maybe to the New York Times. Or social media. Imagine that headline. Fired black janitor exposes $200 million fraud at Sterling Holdings. Do you think people would click on that? Silence. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan just kept shining, like always, completely indifferent to the war starting on the 45th floor. For the first time since I'd started scrubbing that building, she wasn't in control. Her usual arrogance was gone, and for a second she just looked like a person who finally realized the janitor might know how to read. I walked toward the door, then stopped and glanced back. Tomorrow, I said, I'll be back on my normal cleaning schedule. After all, there's still a lot of dirt to clean up around here. I left her standing there, with her perfect makeup and her ruined sense of security, my flash drive still warm in my hand. That was the moment she started to understand that the man she treated like background noise had been listening, learning, and keeping receipts the whole time. Now you might be thinking, David, why didn't she just call the cops right there? Have you dragged out in handcuffs? A good question. But here's something about powerful people who are used to getting their way. When they panic, they don't become smart. They become vindictive. Their first instinct isn't, what's the logical move? It's, how do I destroy the person who scared me? That instinct would end up destroying her instead. She went home that night and didn't sleep. I know she didn't, because at 6 a.m., she was already calling people. And by 8 a.m., The whole building could feel the tension in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. While she paced barefoot across the marble floors of her penthouse, barking into her phone, I was tying my work boots and heading in like it was any other day, nodding at the security guys scanning my badge, pushing my cart. On the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything was different. But to understand why I wasn't terrified, why I walked into that building after threatening the CEO of a corporation, you need to know where I came from and how long I'd been building toward this moment. I grew up in Connecticut, raised by my grandmother, a woman who cleaned houses for rich families her entire life. She used to bring me with her when I was small, so she could keep an eye on me. I learned early how to walk quietly across polished marble, how not to leave fingerprints on glass tables, how to make myself small in houses full of things we could never afford. "Boy," she'd say, scrubbing someone else's sink while the owners stood above us talking about vacations and tax shelters. People like us only survive if we know when to speak and when to listen. And listening is almost always more valuable. I didn't really get it back then, but that sentence ended up shaping my whole life. School was my thing. I loved numbers. Numbers didn't care if your shoes were old or your accent gave away the neighborhood you grew up in. They just told you whether something added up or not. I worked hard, and I got something not a lot of people in my neighborhood got: a scholarship, accounting at the University of Connecticut. I know it doesn't sound glamorous, but to me those textbooks were like a manual to the secret language rich people used to hide what they were really doing. Forensic accounting, corporate finance, auditing, all that boring stuff that actually decides whether a company is honest or crooked. I did well. Top of my class, professors knew my name. Some of them told me I could be one of the best in the field if I stuck with it. I had a plan. Get the degree, pass the exams, maybe end up inside one of those downtown offices wearing a suit instead of a uniform. Then life did what life does sometimes. It hit me from a side I didn't see coming. My grandmother got sick. Not the kind of sick where she just needed a few days to rest. The kind of sick that comes with long hospital stays. Specialists, treatments, medications that cost more than most people make in a month. Insurance didn't cover everything. Bills piled up. Choices had to be made. So I did what a lot of people in my position do. I dropped out in my junior year, told myself I'd go back one day when things calmed down, and started working wherever I could. Warehouse shifts, dishwashing odd jobs, and eventually office cleaning on the night shift. That's how I walked into Sterling Holdings for the first time, wearing a Navy uniform and carrying a bucket, thinking it was just another building. It wasn't. From the very first week, I could feel the difference. This wasn't just a regular company. This place smelled like money and entitlement. Glass walls, abstract art people walking around with that look, like the world was something that happened for them, not to them. And because I was just the cleaning guy, they talked in front of me like I was furniture. Conference rooms. Late nights, executives on their fifth espresso loosened ties. Shoes off under the table, complaining about regulators, bragging about contracts, laughing about how easy it was to get public money if you knew who to charm. I'd be in the corner wiping a whiteboard or emptying a trash can, and they'd talk openly about moving numbers like they were pieces on a board, never once thinking about the people behind those numbers. At first, I tried not to listen. You hear a lot of things when you're invisible, and most of it just makes you tired. But then I started noticing specific phrases, things that didn't sit right with the part of my brain that still loved clean ledgers and balanced sheets. Just move it to the offshore account, we'll clean it up before the audit. Raise the bid. The city will approve it anyway if the right person gets their bonus. Lay off another 30 workers we need to hide the hole from last quarter. Those weren't just annoying comments. Those were red flags. And here's the thing. Once you've studied fraud on paper, it's a lot easier to recognize when you see it in real life. I started paying more attention. Not just to what they said, but to what they left lying around. Printed contracts half shoved into folders, spreadsheets pulled up on screens when people forgot to lock their computers before they ran to answer a call. Passwords typed in while I was busy wiping dust off the table. They never covered the keyboard. Why would they? I was just the janitor. It would have probably stayed just frustration and curiosity if it hadn't been for one afternoon that burned itself into my memory. It was a Tuesday. 3 months before the night she caught me at her computer. Quarterly results day. The big conference room was full of board members, assistants' laptops, bottled water, untouched fruit platters that I knew I'd be throwing away later. I was in there cleaning up after a previous meeting when they walked in. Victoria and 5 executives laughing, talking about share prices and bonuses. She didn't tell me to leave. She didn't even acknowledge me. I was just noise. I moved to the corner wiping the glass wall while they hooked up their slides. Then she started her presentation. Profits are 23% above projections, she said, with that polished smile, clicking to a slide full of green arrows. Thanks to our restructuring of the public contracts division. My stomach tightened. I had seen that restructuring in the numbers. It didn't look like smart business. It looked like theft dressed up in legal language. As she kept talking, one of the executives spilled coffee across the table right next to a stack of printed documents. I did what I was supposed to do. I grabbed paper towels and rushed over. "Stop!" she snapped, cutting off her own sentence, staring at me like I'd broken something. "Can you clean properly this time? It seems you can't even learn the simplest tasks." The room went quiet, except for the hum of the projector. Then the low, awkward laughter started the kind people do when they know something isn't funny, but they're too scared not to laugh. Some of them looked away. None of them spoke up. "People like this," she said, gesturing toward me without even using my name, "only understand when we make it very clear where everyone stands. People like this. If you've ever been reduced to people like this, you know exactly how that feels. If you haven't, ask yourself honestly, do you think that's fair?" I felt my face getting hot, my heart pounding against my ribs, every part of me wanting to snap back. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry, ma'am," in the quietest voice I could manage, and I wiped the coffee slower, not faster. My hands were cleaning, but my eyes were working. I saw the names on the documents, the project codes, a list of account numbers with country abbreviations that didn't match anything local. When she turned her laptop slightly, I caught something else. Part of a password I'd been trying to confirm, the way her fingers moved the little pattern I'd nearly figured out. They thought they'd put me in my place that day. What they really did was show me exactly where the battle line was. When I walked out of that conference room, something had shifted. I didn't just feel hurt. I felt clear. I realized these people weren't just rude or arrogant. They were dangerous. And the only language they really respected was power. I didn't have their money. I didn't have their job titles. But I did have something they didn't value at all. The ability to be invisible on demand, and a brain trained to see when the books didn't add up. That night, I opened my old college textbooks again at my tiny kitchen table. I read about fraud detection with a very different kind of focus. I started planning. Months went by. I took photos of documents left on desks. I memorized login patterns. I placed tiny recorders in strategic places hidden behind plants tucked near vents disguised in those little fake air fresheners everyone ignores. I copied files when nobody was around. I listened to conversations about restructuring that were really just creative ways to say, stealing. 3 years. That's how long it took from the day I decided to stop swallowing my anger to the night she walked in and found me in her chair. So when she spent the whole night after that confrontation making phone calls, and when I got called into HR the next morning, I wasn't surprised. Rachel, the HR director, looked tired, like she'd been caught in the crossfire. "David, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low. We sat in a tiny office that smelled like paper and stress. "Is there a problem?" I asked. She opened a thick folder, then closed it again like she didn't even know why she'd brought it. "Look, your record here is spotless," she said. 3 years, no tardiness, no complaints, no write-ups. But Ms. Sterling wants you out of the company today. Did I do something wrong?" I asked, tilting my head just enough to make the question sound innocent. "It's not about your work," she admitted, her eyes dropping. "It's political. You understand how these things go." Oh, I understood perfectly. I smiled just a little, which I think actually scared her more than if I'd gotten angry. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I understand." While Rachel was rehearsing how to walk me out without making it look too ugly. 3 floors up, Marcus, the head of corporate security, was giving Victoria his findings. No criminal record, no debt. Excellent references from previous employers. And one detail that she did not want to hear. Hititsa dropped out of accounting school in his junior year. Marcus probably told her, but his grades were exceptional. He had near-perfect scores in corporate finance and auditing. Imagine being her in that moment, realizing the man she'd been calling incompetent for 3 years used to be one of the best students in the exact area that could ruin her. Then, hearing there had been an increase in anonymous, well-documented reports sent to federal agencies about corporate fraud in the last 6 months, written by someone who clearly understood the system from the inside. That was me. Yeah, that happened. So when I left the building that day, with my badge turned in and my last paycheck in my pocket, I wasn't walking out as a defeated man. I was walking out as a whistleblower who finally had nothing left to lose. And I didn't go home. I took the subway downtown to a little cafe near the financial district, the kind of place where everyone wears ID badges and pretends their coffee meetings are saving the world. I sat in a corner booth, my old jacket zipped up flash drive in my pocket, and waited. A tall gray-haired man in a simple suit walked in. He scanned the room, saw me, and came over. "David," he said, shaking my hand with a firm, no-nonsense grip. "James Mitchell, thanks for reaching out." James used to work for the FBI, specializing in corporate financial crimes. These days, he did consulting for public interest organizations. The kind of people who actually care what happens when companies think nobody's watching. I didn't waste his time. I pulled out the flash drive set it on the table, and slid it toward him. 3 years of evidence, I said. Internal documents, meeting recordings, compromising emails, transaction logs, contract copies. All tied to Sterling Holdings. All tied to Victoria and her board. He plugged it into his laptop. For the next 10 minutes, the world shrank down to the clicking of his mouse and the changing expressions on his face. Curious, focused, shocked. "This is," he finally said. Leaning back, "This is a gold mine. Money laundering, rigged public contracts, large-scale tax evasion, stock manipulation. David, you realize this isn't just enough to take down a CEO. This could wipe out an entire board of directors." "That's the idea," I said. "But I'm not stupid. They have money lawyers' connections. I can't just drop this online and hope for the best. I need this handled right step by step. That's why I contacted you." He nodded slowly, the way people do when they know they're about to step into something big. "You came to the right place," he said. "But I have to ask, why now? You could have sent this in a year ago." I thought about my grandmother. I thought about that boardroom. Those words, "people like this." I thought about the text Rachel had just sent me, the one telling me security would escort me as if I were the problem. Because before I said I had evidence, now I have motivation. And thanks to them firing me, I have something even better. No conflict of interest. They retaliated against a guy who knew the truth. That's not just bad behavior. That's a legal advantage. Pattern interrupt. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. James closed the laptop and tapped his fingers on the table. All right, he said. Here's how we do this. We sort the evidence into different packages. FBI gets the money laundering and federal fraud. IRS gets the tax evasion. SEC gets the stock manipulation and securities violations. We time the submissions so they hit close together, overwhelming any attempt to bury them. At the same time, I get in touch with a couple of journalists who live for this kind of story. What about me, I asked. Am I hiding or am I front and center? That depends, he said. Do you want to be anonymous? Or are you ready to stand in the open with your name on this? I looked out the cafe window watching people rush by in suits, the same kind of people who'd been stepping over folks like me for years. I'm done being invisible, I said. If this story is going to mean anything to the workers watching, they need to see my face. They need to know that when you say, just the janitor, you're talking about a human being who can fight back. He smiled for the first time. In that case, he said, when this breaks, you're not just a source. You're the story. We agreed on a timeline. 48 hours. That's all he needed to get the evidence into the right hands at the right agencies, with enough detail that nobody could ignore it. In 48 hours, the life I knew and the life Victoria knew were both going to be over one way or another. Before we left, I told him something I hadn't mentioned in my emails. Sterling isn't the only company doing this, I said. And I'm not the only invisible worker paying attention. He raised an eyebrow. For the last 6 months, I said. I've been building connections with other cleaners, security guards, receptionists, IT guys, people who see things in other Manhattan companies. A lot of them have their own stories. Some already have documents. Some just have suspicions that need help turning into evidence. This isn't just about one crooked CEO. This is a pattern. He sat back, really looking at me. Then not like a client or a source, but like a partner. David, he said slowly. Do you realize what you're describing? I nodded. Not revenge, I said. A quiet revolution. That was the twist. This wasn't one angry janitor trying to get back at his boss. This was the first visible crack in a wall that a lot of people had already been pushing against in silence. 2 days later, at 6:47 a.m., on a Friday, Victoria's phone rang. She was probably still half asleep when she answered, expecting a driver or an assistant. Instead, she heard Marcus, her head of security, sounding more serious than she'd ever heard him. Ms. Sterling, we have a problem. He must have said. Several problems, actually. FBI agents in the lobby of Sterling Holdings with search and seizure warrants. IRS teams behind them with audit orders. SEC investigators asking for access to trading records and communications. While she scrambled out of bed, turning on her computer, trying to make sense of the chaos, the rest of the world was already reading the story online. Cleaner reveals $1 million scheme, the headline read. How fired black employee exposed $200 million fraud at Sterling Holdings. My picture in my old uniform, pushing a cart right next to a photo of her in a sparkling dress at some charity event. Smiling at the camera like she owned the world. The contrast wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. The article laid everything out. The rigged contracts, the offshore accounts, the emails, the recordings. My 3 years of quiet evidence gathering turned into an easy-to-follow narrative even someone who'd never read a spreadsheet could understand. They mentioned how I'd been fired right after confronting her about it. They quoted whistleblower retaliation laws. They put my name in bold. Name. Then social media took over. Victoria. Sterling, scandal, justice for David. Those hashtags started trending in minutes. People dug up photos of me and her at company events, old press releases, bragging about her innovative leadership quotes about respecting every team member that sounded like poison now. And then came the clip. Someone somewhere had leaked the audio I'd recorded in that boardroom 3 months earlier. The recording of her saying, "Can you clean properly this time? It seems you can't even learn the simplest tasks." People like this only understand when we make it very clear where everyone stands. Her voice, crystal clear, played over images of me. News anchors replayed it. Twitter played it. Talk shows played it. It became the soundbite for a bigger conversation about race class and how people like her talk when they think the help isn't really listening. Do you think that's fair? People were asking on every platform. Or have we all just gotten used to this kind of thing until someone finally gets caught? While that storm raged online, the board of Sterling Holdings was panicking. Stock price dropping like a rock. Partners canceling contracts. Phones ringing non-stop. Federal agents walking through their floors with warrant folders and evidence bags. By 9 a.m., the board had held an emergency meeting. By 9:30, they had voted unanimously to remove Victoria as CEO. The man who called her from the boardroom wasn't soft about it. "You have 1 hour to clear your office," he told her. "Security will escort you out. You can't do this to me." She must have screamed the same way she used to bark at me for a smudge on a glass wall. No, he probably replied, cold and tired. "You did this to yourself." A few blocks away, I was standing outside another building in a simple suit that actually belonged to me. This time, surrounded by microphones and cameras. The same city that had watched me push a mop now watched me speak on live TV. A reporter asked David, "What do you say to people who think this was just revenge?" I looked into the camera and thought about every cleaner, every cook, every security guard who'd ever told me a story, starting with, "You're not gonna believe what my boss said today." This was never about revenge, I said, steady and clear. This was about justice. It was about making sure people who steal from the public and treat their workers like they're disposable don't get to stay untouchable just because they have the right last name and the right friends. That's it. Across the street, 45 floors up, Victoria was probably watching that same interview from the office she was already packing up. When security walked her out later through the same hallways, where she used to walk like a queen, she passed the little corner where I kept my supplies. Someone had taped a handwritten sign above the cleaning station. "All honest work has dignity no matter what uniform you wear." I didn't write that sign. Somebody else did. That might have been the moment she finally understood what she'd lost. Not just her job, not just her status, but the illusion that she could treat people however she wanted and never answer for it. That night, while her lawyers tried to figure out what could be saved and what was gone forever, I sat on my couch in Queens, watching the news flip through images of raids, lawsuits, panicked investors, and interviews with retirees who'd lost part of their pensions because of schemes her company ran. If it were you, I wondered out loud, how far would you have gone to stop it? 6 months later, my life was unrecognizable compared to the days when I pushed a cart down those hallways. I had an ID badge again, but this one didn't say janitor. It said consultant. The office wasn't on the 45th floor of a private company this time. It was inside a federal building in a division that investigated financial crimes. The director had told me during the interview, "Your experience is exactly what we need. You can see things our regular auditors don't see because you've been on the other side of the glass." On my desk, there were stacks of files from different companies. Patterns of fraud. Suspicious transfers. Little clues left behind by arrogant people who thought only their peers were smart enough to catch them. I'd lean back in my chair, sometimes look at a set of numbers, and feel that same little tug I used to feel at Sterling when something didn't add up. Corrupt executives started to learn my name. Some of them probably cursed it behind closed doors. Good. They never said it when I was cleaning. And as for Victoria, she didn't go to prison for life. That's not how white-collar crime usually works in this country. She was convicted, though. Fines. Restitution. restrictions. Her accounts were frozen. Her mansions, cars, designer furniture, all that luxury she used to wear like armor started disappearing in auctions and sales to pay for what she'd done. The business magazines that once called her visionary started calling her disgraced former CEO. The jobs she applied for after that came back with polite rejections. Some employers didn't even bother responding. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment in Queens, not too far from where I started. She did some telemarketing work for a while, but even that didn't last. Eventually, she ended up working nights for a small cleaning company. The irony isn't lost on anybody. I don't say that to mock her. I say it because there's something brutally honest about life making her do the job she used to look down on. Maybe that's what it took for her to understand that cleaning isn't a symbol of failure. It's a symbol of honesty. A cleaner sees everything and hides nothing. One afternoon, coming home from work, I got on a crowded subway train. I was scrolling through my phone, answering messages from a group chat we'd started for whistleblowers and advocates, when I felt a pair of eyes on me. I looked up. Victoria was standing a few feet away, one hand wrapped around the overhead bar, the other holding a cheap handbag. No stylist, no designer outfit, just a tired woman in an ordinary coat. For a second, she tried to look away, like if she didn't acknowledge me, the past 6 months might vanish. "Ms. Sterling," I said quietly. She looked up. The fear in her eyes wasn't dramatic. It was something smaller, a kind of shame that doesn't fit into headlines. She opened her mouth, closed it again, like she wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but didn't know where to start. "I hope you're doing well," I said. No sarcasm, no smirk, just the truth. And then I stepped off at the next stop, because the truth is, my fight was never about making sure she suffered every second of her life. My fight was about drawing a line and saying, "You can't keep getting away with this," not without someone pushing back. I had already won what mattered. I got my dignity back. I got a purpose bigger than my own bruised ego. Today, I help lead a national program that supports whistleblowers, especially the ones in uniforms, the ones without titles, the ones who see everything but think their voices don't matter. We teach them how to document safely, how to protect themselves legally, how to connect with honest journalists and lawyers instead of scammers and fakes. Remember that little network I told you about, the cleaners and guards and receptionists from different companies? That network is stronger now and louder. So let me ask you, now that you've heard my story all the way through, was what I did right? Was it justice or was it revenge, dressed up as righteousness? Do you think people like Victoria deserve another chance at power after what they've done, or should? Some doors stay closed forever. And most importantly, if you were in my shoes, if you were people like this to someone who thought they were untouchable, what would you have done? Because here's what I've learned. The world is full of Victorias, but it's also full of Davids. Full of people in uniforms who hear things, see things, and notice when the numbers don't add up. Power counts on those people staying quiet. Arrogance counts on them believing they're alone. They're not. If this story made you feel anything, anger, hope, frustration, maybe even a little discomfort, I want you to tell me why. If you've ever been that invisible worker in the room, if you've ever been humiliated by someone who thought your job made you less human, I want to hear your story in the comments. If you think I went too far, say that too. Let's talk about it. Hit like if you believe that all honest work has dignity, no matter the uniform. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that underestimating the wrong person can cost you everything. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and stick around, because there are a lot more stories like mine out there, and some of them might sound a little too familiar. Now it's your turn. Was this justice, or just the beginning of a bigger reckoning?